An auteur in filmmaking means the view in which the director is considered the main creative force and influence in a motion picture. This concept was developed in order to distinguish French New Wave filmmakers from the more traditional Hollywood filmmaking that was being created at the time, which followed a similar narrative, was filmed in the same studios with actors that featured in many of the films. This differs from the French New Wave films at the time, which featured a more of a documentary-style narrative and included a more fragmented editing style, and included a lot of long takes. French New Wave films were created on a much lower budget than Hollywood films and did not follow as much of a conventional narrative and used this fragmented editing style and a lot of long takes. This differs from the Hollywood films at the same time, which were often filmed in the same studios and included the same actors. French New Wave films greatly differed from this and were often filmed outside in an everyday setting, being set in more of a documentary style. They were created on a low budget, which was unavoidable, but filmmakers saw this as artistic freedom, which again opposed to Hollywood films which had high production values and relied on stars. The auteur theory is often credited to François Truffaut, a French filmmaker and theorist of the French journal Cahiers du Cinéma, who greatly criticised the Hollywood films of the time, criticising their tradition of quality. He argued that the tradition of quality offers little more than the practice of filming scripts, mechanically transferring them script to screen. People often refer to an article he wrote in 1954 as the beginning of the auteur theory, entitled A Certain Trend of French Cinema, in which he also criticised the current state of French films, criticising screenwriters and their producers, also naming 8 directors who he considered incapable of devising the kinds of vile and grotesque characters and storylines that he declared were characteristic of the mainstream French industry. However, Professor Julian Cornwall of New York University argued against criticising, saying how Cahiers du Cinéma simply popularised or revived this concept as it already existed. She quoted, "In the French New Wave, people developed the notion of the filmmaker as an artist. They didn't invent the idea, but they did popularise it. A German filmmaker who started as a German theatre director, Max Reinhardt, came up with the idea of the auteur. The author in films. He came up with that around the teens, so Truffaut and the French New Wave popularised it, or they revived it." Others say that another French critic and director named Alexandre Astier first mentioned auteur theory in his 1948 essay entitled The Birth of New Avant-Garde, Le Camera Stylo. Camera stylo translates to camera pen, saying that directors should wield their cameras like writers wield their pens. Astier is essentially saying that filmmakers should have more control and artistic vision over the work, which is what an auteur is, someone who is the main creative and artistic mind behind the project. This was written 6 years before Francois' article. The auteur theory argues that a film is a reflection of its director's artistic vision, meaning that films made by the same director have reoccurring and recognisable themes. These reoccurring themes can be the use of a certain type of character or a certain editing style. It is simply a technique that is used throughout the director's filmography and is recognisable, displaying a consistent artistic identity throughout. For example, when looking at a modern director, famous filmmaker Tim Burton, who is known for films such as Edward Scissorhands, The Nightmare Before Christmas and Corpse Bride, is a great example. We can recognise several recurring themes throughout his films. He often uses the same actors. He has frequently used Johnny Depp and Christopher Lee. Burton's films are also famous for their outcasted character, such as Edward Scissorhands in Edward Scissorhands, Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, and Willy Wonka in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. These characters were known for being strange, unique and different. Having a unique character that complemented the story of the film became a staple in his movies, with films such as Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands being most memorable for the characters, a character that fit perfectly into the style of films that Burton is known for. Auteur filmmakers differ from auteur en scène, which is a filmmaker who does not add a personal aesthetic to the film, not having the recurring themes that an auteur director would have. There are not common themes throughout their films. Auteur directors have themes that are recognisable throughout and show that it is a film created by that particular director, with themes we may recognise from other films that they have created. Auteur and scene directors do not show a consistency in style, unlike auteur directors that do show a consistency. When beginning to study auteur, we first looked at Alfred Hitchcock, famous for classic films such as Psycho, Rear Window and North by Northwest. Hitchcock is one of the first names that comes up when discussing the auteur theory, and considering his impressive filmography, it's clear why. One of Hitchcock's most famous recurring themes in his films was the small cameos in his films, having non-speaking parts and only briefly being shown. For example, he is shown winding a clock in the background of the musician's apartment in Rear Window, and is shown missing the bus at the beginning of North by Northwest. It seems that Hitchcock enjoyed the spotlight, and this feature is an interesting one that is common throughout his catalogue, with him appearing in 39 of his 52 surviving major films, as his second film, The Mountain Eagle, is lost. His small cameos became a signature Hitchcock feature throughout his films, and audiences would make a sport of trying to spot his cameos. Another recurring and common theme in Hitchcock films was the use of blonde women in danger. Often Hitchcock used blonde women as the character in danger. For example, in Vertigo, James Stewart forces a woman to dye her hair blonde. In The Lodger, one of Hitchcock's earliest films, there is a serial killer who stalks blonde women. Blonde actress Annie Ondra starred in Hitchcock's first sound film Blackmail. Hitchcock denied it was due to an attraction to blonde women. He said he used blonde actresses in his films because of a tradition that began with Mary Pickford, who was a blonde actor and one of the most popular actresses in the 1910s and 20s. Hitchcock also said that blondes were a symbol of the heroine and said that they photographed better in black and white, which many of his films are in. Hitchcock also used birds in a lot of his films. For example, the plot of the film The Birds revolves around birds attacking Bodega Bay. In Young and Innocent, girls intercut with a young woman discovering a corpse, and in To Catch a Thief, Hitchcock's cameo is that of a man sitting next to Cary Grant on a bus, opposite a cage of chirping birds. Hitchcock also used an ordinary person in extraordinary circumstances in several of his films, enabling the audience to relate to this ordinary person as to what they are witnessing, as it is also surreal to the person on screen, much like it is to the audience. They can relate to this character as they would likely feel the same. For example, in Psycho, Janet Leigh plays a secretary whose personal story is violently interrupted by a murderer. Several smaller details were also frequently used in Hitchcock films, such as the use of staircases, the use of trains, and the recurring theme of characters falling from high places. Hitchcock planned his scripts in detail with his writers. According to writer and film archivist Stephen DeRosa, Hitchcock supervised his writers as they wrote each draft, asking that they tell the story visually. His films were also storyboarded to the finest detail, being able to use it as an excuse not to change his initial vision. If a studio asked him to change a film, he would claim that it was already shot in a single way, and that there was no alternative takes to consider. This means that his films were his own artistic vision, and that he did not allow his work to be changed, and effectively watered down by studios and companies, linking back to the idea of wielding the camera like a writer does his pen, that Astruc created in his 1948 essay, The Birth of New Avant-Garde, Le Camera Stylo. Hitchcock's films all came from his creative vision, and he created some of the most memorable and influential films in cinematic history.